Hi there, this is Pete with BoardGameBoost.com. Thanks for joining me. In this video I'll be covering the assembly and use of the overlay products available at BoardGameBoost.com for the Rails to the North expansion for the game Great Western Trail. As you probably already know, this expansion adds a small extension to the base game player mats. And so customers that have the BoardGameBoost.com overlay products for the Great Western Trail base game that purchase Rails to the North expansion are probably going to be looking for an overlay, a companion overlay for this small extension piece. One of the challenges with this overlay product design was that for the creation of the Rails to the North expansion, the publisher chose to print this player mat extension piece in much thicker punch board, as you see here, compared to the very thin cardstock player mats from the base game. So everyone, whether you're a Board Game Boost customer or not, will have to deal with this pretty substantial variance in thickness. I did the best I could to design around it, and you'll see a little bit more about that as we go through the product. Much like the BoardGameBoost.com overlay products available for the Great Western Trail base game player mats, this product is going to come in two versions, an overlay without backboard version and an overlay with backboard version. Before we get into specific assembly instructions for each version, there are some common steps we need to do to prepare for assembly. First, we need to punch the pieces out of the respective brackets. In the case of the overlay only product, you'll want to punch out the actual overlay from this bracket, as well as these connector pieces right here. Just apply some pressure and they should pop right out. In the case of the overlay with backboard product, there are some connector slots that we'll have to punch out, which I'll talk about in a second. And also in the backboard itself, this whole center piece is to be detached. You just want to go around the edges like this and put some pressure on it, and you'll have this center piece that has all the pieces in it that you can punch out. You can punch these connectors out, but don't punch these A and B's versions out yet until I discuss that in a little more detail. The next step for both versions, before removing the paper, is to punch out these connector slots. In the case of the overlay without backboard version, there's just these two small connectors here. And what I recommend doing is actually using the rounded edge of the bracket that the pieces came in. And very carefully, you want to put these connectors flat down on the table at an angle like this, putting good support with your fingers. And using this rounded edge, just go right here to these connectors, right where the gap is there, and put some pressure down. You'll have to use a little bit of pressure, and you'll hear it snapping away, but you'll see right there that those pieces have been punched. They may not be all the way out yet. That's okay. Those will improve once we remove the protective paper. So again, go ahead and do it on the other side, and you'll hear them snap through like this. The process is the same with the overlay with backboard version. It's just that there are several more connectors you need to do. Since you don't actually have a bracket for these pieces, you'll just want to use the opposing piece. So whether it's the overlay on the backboard or the backboard on the overlay. So once again, you'll want to put the slot you're punching out close to the table and use the rounded edge of the opposing piece and just put some pressure here and they'll snap right out. These again have these two small connector slots right here, just like the overlay only. You want to be very careful with this, putting those close to the table and providing support. And then you'll just reverse it to do it on the backboard piece. Now you'll note that this backboard piece has a large cavity in the middle, so I'll talk about why that is in a minute. But the point is that this is a pretty fragile piece in this state, so you want to be extra careful when punching these slots out, that you provide very good support before you apply any pressure down with the opposing corner. But then you go ahead and do exactly the same thing with the four connector slots there. The last preparation step before assembly is to remove the protective paper from both sides of every piece. Each piece will have these small letter B-shaped protrusions, and those are tabs that stand for break off. So you'll see that one of the two tabs has a line underneath it, and you'll just want to push away from that with your thumb, and you'll see that it breaks off. And what that does is takes the paper with it on the other side so that you don't need to be picking for an edge of the paper with your fingernail. And that makes it possible to do this process while wearing gloves if you choose. So go ahead and remove the protective paper from all of the pieces in your set, and we'll move on to the individual assembly steps. We're going to start with the overlay without backboard product since it's very straightforward. Much like the base game overlay without backboard product, which you see here, it just sits on top of the player mat. Doesn't connect to the player mat at all. So it's the same for the expansion product. We have the overlay, and it's just going to sit on top of the player mat extension board here. And as you can see, it has a spot for the new disc, as well as for the little house tokens that go on each of these bell spaces. Now, this set does come with these connector pieces. These are optional. You could certainly just line this up with the base game player mat and have it sitting in front, and that would work just fine. However, if you're interested in connecting this overlay to the base game overlay, that's what these little connectors are for. As mentioned in the beginning of this video, the material that the player mat extension is made of is much thicker than the base game player mat, so you'll have this height difference between the two overlays of about 2 millimeters, or just less than 1/8 of an inch. So when trying to connect the pieces, that's something that you'll just have to take into play, and that is why the connector pieces look a little odd. There's a short side and a long side. So the way these connectors work, and again, these are completely optional. You can just have these sitting next to each other, but if you do want to try to connect the two overlays, this is what these two connector slots on the new overlay are for, and they will connect to this square section of the bottommost disc area of the base game overlay. So just line the two up, connect them. Don't worry too much about whether this is aligned well for the new overlay at this point, because again, it's not going to actually connect to that overlay, so you can fix that afterwards. But what you do want to do is line up these two connector slot squares with the bottom of this base game overlay. Okay, so here we go. We're going to take this connector. The shorter side always is on the expansion side, and you're just going to line it up on both the expansion and the base game side and put some pressure down, and you'll hear it snapping together. Then you're going to do the same thing with the other connector. And by the way, your set comes with 4 connectors. The extra 2 are just there as spares in case you ever lose these or break them. Okay, now you can see that it's in, and now this is a connected unit. You can move it up, pick it up, move it around some, but this isn't really a permanent connection, so just be careful with it. But as you can see now, you have them as a single unit, and now at this point you can get everything lined up. That's pretty much all there is to it for the overlay only version, or I should say the overlay without backboard. We'll cover the overlay with backboard version right now. The overlay with backboard version of both the base game product and this expansion product sandwiches the player mat between a back panel and the overlay so that it can be moved around and picked up off the table with the components in it. So we're going to do that same concept here for the expansion. There are just a couple of extra steps involved. You can set aside the base game player mat for now, and we'll come back to how that connects in a second. I'm going to bring in here a hard surface that I'm going to use for assembly. I'm going to have my expansion player mat here, and then I'm going to have what is the overlay, the backboard, if you will, which has this open cavity in the middle, and I will have punched out and peeled the paper off of 4 connectors here on the left, 2 long ones and 2 shorter ones, and those are right here. Okay. So let's cover the explanation of this strange backboard unit right off the bat. This is designed this way to offset the thickness difference in this player mat extension compared to the base game player mat, so that when you have this alongside the base game player mat, it's all going to be the same level or very close to it. And the way this does it is this open cavity has these very small ridges along the sides that you'll be able to feel. You probably won't be able to see them that well. But what you want to do is take this overlay, make sure that the ridges are down. A good way to check that is just feeling it again with your thumb, and you'll feel the ridges on one lower side of this opening here. Okay, and then you're going to take your player mat extension board and just fit it in that slot and snap it down. And you'll see that it is flush now with the surface, or very close to flush with the surface of the backboard, but it's still securely in place because of those ridges, and it's quite secure. Okay, when you do that, you want to make sure that the small connector slots, the shorter ones, are at the top and the longer ones are at the bottom. Once you've done that, the next step is to insert these connectors into the slots. Obviously the long one goes into the longer ones on the bottom, and the short connectors go into the short ones at top. So you just want to line them up left to right and apply some pressure. Now you do want to try to make sure that they are perfectly left and right before you snap them down, but once you have them aligned, just put some pressure down and you'll see them go in. Now one thing you do want to make sure happens is that they are completely parallel with the connector slot they're going into, rather than, you know, kind of offset. And you also want to make sure that they're standing perfectly vertical by checking them this way as well. This is all to minimize the risk of any cracking once you connect the overlay to these connectors. So again, go ahead and do that all around the edge with the 4 connectors. Get it lined up, add some pressure, and you'll hear it snap into place as you do this. Okay, and again, check them, each one, to make sure it is aligned in all directions. Okay, I'm just going to give it one last spot check here. And you will have gone through this very same process with the base game overlays. Okay, so everything looks like it's down in place, and now we're going to connect the overlay to it. When connecting the overlay to these connectors, it's going to be pretty obvious the right orientation of the overlay, but again, you just want to make sure that the smaller connectors are on the top and the longer ones are on the bottom, and that these 2 very small slots are at the top as well. What you want to do is you just want to lightly get it lined up here. You want to look straight down at every connector to make sure that it is perfectly aligned with the matching slot in all directions. And once you've done that, you want to just start putting some light pressure down over each connector. Really, you want to only be putting pressure down for each one right at the 2 sides, rather than kind of all over, because then you risk bending the whole thing and possibly cracking it. If you get a difficult one, it's likely that the alignment is just a little off with the slot, so you can just try shifting the overlay a little bit to get it lined up. But as you can hear, as I go around working it slowly down each connector, it's snapping into place. And once you've done that, you'll just want to kind of go around and pinch to make sure it's all down. And as you can see now, that despite the thicker punch board material of the overlay, or I'm sorry, of the player mat extension, it has sandwiched nicely together, nice and clean, and it'll be pretty much identical in height to the base game overlay. At this point, assembly of the actual product is complete, and you can bring back your base game player mat, and you can see that it'll line up very nicely. Of course, it's going to have this border between it because both products have to have that connector border, but that should not be much of an issue. Now, again, you can just start playing right now. This will sit right here very nicely, and because the backboard units have some mass to them, you won't have a lot of moving around. But if you do want to connect this to the base game player mat, that's where these A and B connectors come in. Now, before I explain why there's 2 versions, I'll just show you that this will connect to the base game board using these 2 small connector slots here, and they will connect to this flat area of the bottommost disk space cutout. Now, there's an A version and a B version because around April of 2018, shortly after the publisher of the Great Western Trail game changed from Stronghold to Eggertspiel, they changed very slightly the outside dimensions of the base game player mat. And at that time, around April of 2018, I changed the outside dimensions of the base game overlay very, very slightly to adjust for that. Now, unfortunately, what that did was very slightly change the distance of this bottom flat space here from the edge of the overlay product. And as a result, that requires kind of two different connector versions to accommodate that difference in length. So if you purchased your base game overlay product, and again, this is only for the with backboard version, sometime around April 2018 or after, then you're going to be using the A version. If you purchased the base game overlay product sometime before April 2018 or thereabouts, then you'll want to try the B version. It'll be very obvious whether it's the right or wrong connection. And once you figure out whether it is A or B that you need, you can just throw away the other connectors because you've identified the version that you have. With all that said, you'll need two connectors. I'm going to be using the A version here. And the connectors are the exact same on both sides, so it doesn't matter which way they're oriented. And what we're going to do is line it up here such that these two connector slots are dead set with the bottommost flat space here. And once we get those lined up, then we're going to take one of our connectors and we're going to line it up with this slot and over this here, this edge. And it might be a little bit tight, especially the first time, but you just want to put some downward pressure and you'll hear it start snapping together like so. Okay, and then we're going to do the exact same thing with the other slot. And we're all set. Now, acrylic can be kind of a finicky material, especially when the edges are butting up like this, so you may have a little bounce to your expansion product here, and you can adjust these a little bit by pulling out, pulling up a little bit on one side or another to try to mitigate that. If it bothers you, it may not happen at all. It all kind of depends on the material that you have. But in most cases, you should be able to fiddle with this a little bit to get it to a point that you're comfortable with. Once you've done that, you can see that it is now pretty firmly connected. But, of course, just be careful. These are very thin connectors, so don't put a lot of strain on it. But for the most part, it is going to stay nicely together. And as is pretty obvious, you now have a spot for your extra disc and for the small house tokens that'll fit right here in the different bell slots. And that pretty much covers it. If you have any questions about this product or need some additional assistance with assembly, please don't hesitate to drop me a note at my store website, BoardGameBoost.com. I'm always happy to help as much as I can. Thanks so much for joining me, and remember, if you're playing, you're already winning. See you next time.